Okay, thank you everyone. I'm Gail Hendrickson. I'm the Community Development Director for Clatsop County, and I want to thank everyone for taking time out of what looks to be a beautiful Saturday morning, at least where I'm at in Astoria. And I appreciate you taking time to be here today and to provide your input on the subject of limitations on the number of short-term rentals. Before I begin, I see we have Commissioner Thompson with us, and I would just like to see if she has a few words that she would like to say to everyone.
Thank you, Director Hendrickson. Just welcoming everyone on this beautiful day, looking to see how we can all move forward together to be good neighbors to each other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. When I do that, all your little boxes will go away for me, so I won't be able to see if you raise your hands. So if you do have a question, please feel free to just speak up, and then we will have question time also. The presentation is pretty short, and then I really want to save the bulk of our time for discussion. So. Okay. So just before we get started, even though we've been doing this for 2.5 years, if you are new to Zoom or not very familiar with it, the best way to get my attention is to do the raise hand icon. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a little button that says reactions. If you click on that, it'll bring up this pop-up menu of sorts, and there's a button there that says raise hand. If you click that, it moves your box up to the top left-hand corner, so it gets my attention, so I can call on you. Just briefly, where we're at in life right now. We have been working on the subject of short-term rentals for several years now, and this year we had some developments and action that was taken. So the first of those was Ordinance 2201 that transferred the Arch Cape short-term operating standards from our zoning code over to our county code, which is where all of our other short-term rental ordinance operating standards live. And for those who are not familiar with short-term rentals or how we regulate them in Clatsop County, we actually have two ordinances, one that covers Arch Cape only and one that covers all of the rest of the unincorporated areas. So that's why there are two sets of operating standards. And so Ordinance 2201 was adopted by the board on April 27th of this year. On that same day, they also approved Ordinance 2203, and that updated the operating standards for all of the other short-term rentals that are outside of Arch Cape. Then on June 22nd of this year, the board adopted Ordinance 2205, and that added short-term rentals as a permitted use to 16 zones in unincorporated areas of the county. On July 13th of this year, the board voted to approve a third extension to the existing moratorium on the licensing of new short-term rentals. So that moratorium now is set to expire on December 24th, 2022. And then finally, on July 1st of this year, we had some citizens file for a proposed referendum that would repeal Ordinance 2205, which the board adopted in June. And so when the board did adopt that ordinance in June this year, the other thing that they asked staff to do was to develop a framework for instituting caps or a limit on the number of short-term rentals in the unincorporated areas. And that is why we have gathered here today. So for today's meeting, these are the 4 questions that we're going to focus in on. First of all, should there be a limit or a cap on the number of short-term rentals in unincorporated county? And if there is a cap, how should it be calculated? Should it be just a fixed number where we say there's X number of short-term rentals permitted and they can be anywhere in the county, but as long as they don't exceed that fixed number? Or do we want to go a little bit more finer grain and start looking at it as a percentage of total homes in a particular zone? And then question number 3 would be, should these caps apply everywhere in unincorporated county, or should they focus primarily in certain geographic areas? And you'll see I'm calling out west of Highway 101 and Arch Cape in particular, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment, but there is a reason for that. And then the final question is whether or not all of the short-term rentals that are currently licensed should be grandfathered in. And these questions are also on an online survey on the county's website, which will be open through September 5th. And that's at our county website, which is co.clatsop.or.us. And it's right on the homepage. There's a little revolving button with hot topics, and it's the first one up there. So in terms of where short-term rentals are currently located, we have 181 licensed rentals within unincorporated county. And this map really shows how they're distributed. And you can see that the densest concentration is along the coast, which is where most of the visitors that come here want to go. So you'll see that they're highly clustered in Arch Cape, Cove Beach, and then up north in the Surf Pines, Gearhart urban growth boundary area of the county. So really focusing on that area west of Highway 101 and along the ocean coast. In terms of actual numbers, you'll see that the largest concentration is in Arch Cape. They have 68 licensed short-term rentals, which is just about 38% of all of the licensed short-term rentals in the county. That's followed next by the Coast Beach residential zone, which is the area around Surf Pines up in that part of the Clatsop Plains. And then after that, the next highest would be the coastal residential zone, which includes Cove Beach. Breaking it down even further, you'll see that the majority of those rentals are located west of Highway 101. So out of 181 licensed rentals, we have 138 of them that are west of the highway, and that's over 76% of the rentals. A companion piece to that is the number of complaints. And of the complaints that we've received beginning January 1st, 2018 through July of this year, over 85% of the complaints are coming for short-term rentals that are also west of Highway 1. So you start to see a correlation lining up there. So as I stated, the board asked staff back in June to come up with some initial recommendations about a process and a time frame for establishing caps in unincorporated Clatsop County. So we presented these recommendations to the board this Wednesday on August 3rd at a work session. And what as staff we are initially recommending is that knowing that most of our rentals and most of our complaints are concentrated west of 101, that with regard to the moratorium, we lift that for the properties east of Highway 101, excluding Arch Cape. And the reason for that is, first of all, the Arch Cape area straddles 101. So we have houses on both the east and the west side of 101 that contain short-term rentals. And I forgot what my other point was, so we'll move on to the next point. We're also recommending that that moratorium be retained for right now through December 24th until for properties on the west side of 101 and for all of Arch Cape. And then we've kind of covered our geographic locations. We would be making a recommendation that caps also be included in areas that would include Cove Beach, Surf Pines, and the Highlands area. And then one of the things that we need to think about is how do we establish a cap? And again, is it just a fixed number? Is it a percentage of total housing units within each zone? Do we want to require a separation between short-term rentals and that are existing and new short-term rentals? And so that's really what the bulk of our discussion is going to be focusing on today. And I'm here primarily to listen, to answer some questions if need be, but I'm really here just to gather your input. We will be taking this to the board on September 21st for a work session, and we'll be presenting all the input that we've received. So these are our 4 questions. Again, should there be caps? If so, how do we establish the caps? Where do we want the caps to be? And do we want a grandfather in the short-term rentals? And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody again. I'm going to pause for questions, and then after that, I'm just going to open it up for discussion. So are there any questions for me at this point?
Yes, this is Vivian Simon Brown. Can you
Yes,
hear
go
me?
ahead, Vivian.
Okay. Do I need to give you my address too?
No.
Okay, fair enough. I have a question about grandfathering. I listened to your work session and I'm wondering whether you came up with a legal definition of grandfathering in.
I didn't go back and look for one. I know from my previous work experience, we always talk about grandfathering in, and I was always told, well, you know, that's not a real legal term. So, I mean, we can go back and look at that, but there is a process where you keep people retroactively in place where they were. So whether it's officially called grandfathering or not, there is a process for that legally.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And I see Dennis Mcvicker.
There we go. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
At the work session, there was also discussion about permit length, permit fees, and additional regulations. I note that those are not included in today's discussion. Can you explain the status of those staff recommendations to the commission?
Yes. So as I understood the direction from the board on Wednesday, they wanted our public meetings to focus on the cap issue. What I also understood from the board is that we have just done all these operating standard updates, and I don't know if it was a unanimous consensus, but there was a lot of discussion about how we need to let those work for a bit to see how they are playing out before we continue to refine the ordinance. So that was my understanding. I know Commissioner Thompson, obviously you were at the board meeting on Wednesday. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
What you're saying comports with my observation as well. Thank you.
So we can assume that the board is not going to move ahead on fees or other changes to the ordinances, and today we can just focus on the caps.
Yeah, today we'll focus on the caps. When we go back to the board on September 21st, we will raise the fee and permit issue again and operating changes just to see if they have any further direction for us. But for right now, as we understand for staff, we're just moving forward with discussion on caps.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next, I see Susanna Gladwin.
Hi, I have several questions. One is the East County, that it was not, short-term rentals were not a permitted use. Is that correct?
No, we have been licensing them in all areas of unincorporated county where there's a legal single family dwelling.
Oh, okay. And I have a request that is it anachronism, the abbreviations to have
Acronym.
Acronym, yeah, have all of them defined somewhere in the document. There was a long list of zoning ones. I was surprised how long the list was, including RA5, RA1, which I know those zoning things, but not lots of others. And on the survey, I've already filled out the initial survey. Do you want us to fill out more surveys or not, if we've already filled it out?
I'm not sure which initial survey you're referring to, Susanna, but we do have one that is currently up on the county's website that is specifically focused on the question of caps for short-term rentals. Okay. So yes, I would encourage you to fill that out, please.
And then I think on violations, one way to determine somebody retaining their permit is that there are not a certain number of violations, that if you go over a certain number of violations on a property, that they don't get re-permitted or the permit is taken away.
There is revocation language in the code that talks about when permits can be revoked. It's not a mandatory requirement. And if we can't, as staff, co-compliance staff can't validate a complaint, or the complaint's been resolved, within moments, sometimes we'll get a complaint that, trash has been left outside of a container, but then, within an hour it's been removed because either the garbage truck has picked it up, or, somebody's put it in the bin or done something with it. So to date, we have not revoked any short-term rental licenses.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thanks, Susanna. Next, I see Davis CC, resident voter.
Thank you. This is Denise Davis. Can you hear me okay?
I can, Denise.
Super.
I have a presentation.
All righty. I'll go ahead. Director Hendrickson, we're delighted to see the new online survey on this topic, and thank you very much for distributing it widely. We do have a question though about the first question on the survey, and we think perhaps the request to have residents give their input on a total cap, maybe that's unclear. Should there be a total cap on STRs in the unincorporated county? And if total cap refers to total housing stock, or the methodology refers to total housing stock versus capped based on zone or a ratio otherwise, we just think that could be unclear to respondents, and which will of course mean that your results will be unclear as well. So the question, do you have a plan perhaps to clarify what is meant by question number 1 for total cap?
Well, I'm not sure what you're seeing as a difference between a cap and a total cap. To me, a cap is a limit. So what would be, what do you, what are you understanding to be the difference between a limit and a total limit?
Great, thanks so much for asking. Because the first question and second question are both about caps, I interpreted the first question as relating to a cap on the total housing stock across the county. And I interpret the second question as asking whether the cap should be based on a ratio by zone, for example. That's how I interpreted the first question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, Denise. We worked with public affairs to craft the questions, so I can raise your concerns to public affairs and see if they have any way to revise the wording. I'm a little concerned that we've probably had about 100 people respond already, and I would be a little bit concerned about changing the questioning in midstream, so to speak. But I can definitely raise your concern to her and public affairs officer and let her know.
Thanks, Director Hendrickson. I'm even thinking of, even if we just remove the word total, maybe that would eliminate any confusion that might be related to total, or might be interpreted as total housing stock.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I don't see anyone else with their hand raised. Oh, there we go, Vivian. Or someone named Paula. I don't know who's actually there.
Hi, this is Paula King.
Oh, okay, hi Paula.
Yeah, just a quick question and clarification. How do you figure percentage in neighborhoods? So when we're talking about an entire zone, there may be blocks and blocks without a short-term rental. And like my letter to the commissioners in April, I noted that within my particular almost like 4 block by 8 block radius, I have 10 short-term rentals with pretty high ratio. It was like 48 houses and 10 of those were short-term rentals. So I'm curious how you figure capping or the percentage in particular neighborhoods. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's something that we've been thinking about. I don't know that we have an answer or a recommendation. There's really two ways to do it, as I see it. You do it either based on the current housing stock that's there today and fix that percentage, and that's that. Or you do it on the total number of potential housing units. And then as units are added, the number of short-term rental units could also grow as new housing is built in a particular area. Does that make sense?
Yes, that sounds futuristic. I guess in some ways it's sort of not going to answer the cluster we have right now of short-term rentals that already exist. And some, I don't know if the grandfathering question would on your survey make a difference on that. So I don't know if you've come up with a way of having a ratio in a neighborhood that is current.
Well, we do know, what the current ratio is right now based on short-term rentals versus existing housing stock. So we do have that number. And the numbers range anywhere from just over 1% to about 30%, depending on the neighborhood. And I forgot where I was going with that answer.
So do you consider Sunset Beach a neighborhood?
Well, it's by zone. So Sunset Beach, I think a lot of your zone is RA1. And hold on, let me go back to my numbers. Okay, so in the RA1 neighborhood, that's residential agriculture 1, and that includes all of the RA1 throughout the entire county. So there are 19 total short-term rentals in that area, which is 10% of the total short-term rentals that we have throughout the county. And then on the table below that, you'll see RA1 zone. 15 of those 19 short-term rentals are west of Highway 101, and that is about 5.73% of the total dwelling units in that zone that exist right now. Unfortunately, or for you, they are clustered around your house, so they're
Right.
not widely dispersed throughout that entire zone. And
So can you see my concern?
no, I completely understand your concern. So
Yep. Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Next, I see Rob.
Hello, thank you. I hope you can see my screen. I'm trying to share it through the video. Is that working?
Hold on a second here. Okay, so hit share screen now at the bottom of your screen and.
Sure. That work?
Yep.
Okay, great. So my name's Rob Chambers. I'm an STR owner in Arch Cape, proud community member, and I try to be the best neighbor I can be. Put a little presentation just to keep my thoughts in order so I don't ramble. And so I was going to go through that today. I was trying to figure out, why really are we here today? And you talked a little bit about that earlier, but the way I saw it was, trying to introduce capture limits are really about, different possible things. So let's go through those. First one is the complaints. As you mentioned, the board voted to approve in April and passed in June, ordinance 2205. It's only been 45 days. I don't really understand why we're trying to do anything now when we don't really have the data on is it actually working yet. Also, you shared earlier that there are 11% of the complaints are from Arch Cape and 35% of the complaints from Cove Beach. I assume that's from the earlier time as well, not just the last 45 days. And so if we're trying to really focus on complaints, I don't think Arch Cape or even west of 101 really is where the problem is. I think the problem is very clearly in Cove Beach, where the 35% of the complaints exist, but they only have about 10% of the STRs in the county incorporated. So I don't really think it's about the complaints because we're not waiting to see what the data looks like, or we're not targeting it in the place where it's really, really, really a problem. So housing costs, I've heard a lot of people talk about housing costs before. I just want to dispel that myth with actual data, and I'll provide that to the county so you can put it on the website so people can actually look at the real data. So I compiled this from the data available on clatsopcounty.org.us of the 77 properties that are west of 101 in the Arch Cape and the Falcon Cove area only, because those are the areas closest around my residence. And from that data, what I saw was I took a look at the county taxed assessed value. I'm trying to ascertain, are these homes affordable for anybody that's sort of in the median income position? So the average assessed value for a beachfront property in Arch Cape is $760,000. Falcon Cove is $463,000. West of 101, but not beachfront, is $390,000 in Arch Cape and $293,000 in Falcon Cove. And then, as you know, real market value is actually significantly higher than the assessed value. So that's 1.2, 500,000, 900,000, 600,000, very, very expensive properties. And that's actually still not even really the real market value. So if you look at Zillow, which most of the homes that have been sold in the last 6 months have gone at or above the Z estimate. That's their AI algorithm for figuring out what homes are worth. They say Arch Cape beachfront property averages 1.7. This is calculated by me going to Zillow and looking at every single one of the 77 or 78 properties and calculating this. Very expensive homes. The US Census says that the median value of owner-occupied housing is only $309,000. None of those houses qualify from an average or a median perspective. And even if you look at the absolute minimum value, only one of them qualifies. There's one home, maybe two, that are under $309,000 in that area. So nobody's going to be able to afford them unless they make more than median income. Let's look at that median income. That median income is $57,000. There's a 28% rule on how you figure out how much you're supposed to spend a month on housing. So that gets you to about $1,340 per month. Well, let's take a look at what this actually, the Z estimates for rent values are. It's $6,000 per month in Arch Cape. This is nowhere near $1,340. It's not going to have any meaningful, appreciable impact on housing for low income or not even like slightly below median income in any of those areas. And then if you look at the, why is that? Well, that's because the houses are very expensive. Per square foot, it's $1,000 per square foot to purchase a home in Arch Cape. It's $750 on the beachfront. It's $750 per square feet to get a beachfront property on Falcon Cove. Even when you're not beachfront, but west of 101, it's $500 per square foot. If you're thinking people are going to rent for $1,340 when the average price to acquire is $500 per square foot, that's 3 square feet. Like, that's just kind of crazy. Average square feet is $3.40 per square foot to rent in Arch Cape. The reason it's 6,000 is because most of the houses are very big. So you're not going to be able to impact that market either. So housing is just never going to be a thing that you're going to solve. I don't think complaints are either, because we just talked about that. We're not waiting to see where we are. So what are we really doing here? It seems to me that we're applying a lot of exclusionary thinking. And that exclusionary thinking goes like, well, I don't like people from outside the county, or, oh, I don't like people from outside my community or outside my friend group, and I won't talk to them. And we've heard those kinds of complaints. And that's why we have things like, we do in the new ordinance where you can't complain without, giving your name, because that way you'll actually have to be substantiated and it has to be real. I have had, I think in the last year, one person mentioned one possible problem with a guest. And when I looked into it, within 10 minutes, it was actually a neighbor that had caused that problem. It wasn't the guest. Exclusionary thinking is just going to lead us down a path of the same kind of problems we get when people are racists or people are elitists. If we're trying to make it better from housing, the only thing we're doing is making it more possible for, if we take those STRs off and we shut them all down or we severely limit them, all we're doing is, nothing. So I don't support capping on the very edge of the coast. If you want to cap other places to try to ensure housing, I understand that. If you want to cap even east of 101 or maybe even not beachfront, I don't know. If you look at Seaside uses a density approach to how they do it. They have a corridor on the coast that you're allowed to rent. East of that corridor, you cannot. Like, they're prohibited. So why aren't we looking at a system like that? That system also, when they're looking at that 100-foot rule, it's not 100 feet like Clatsop is proposing, which is very exclusionary. What they do is they apply a rule which is within 100 feet, they count the number of VRDs, and then it has to be below a certain density. That certain density is either 20%, 30%, or 50%. 20% is more east, 50% is more west. They're basically saying approximately every other house on the coast on the actual beachfront can be an STR, because nobody else is going to be able to afford to live there, to buy the property, or even to rent it long term. We rent our property to people that can't afford to buy a house on the beach. We rent our home to people that can't afford to buy a house nearby Arch Cape even. They can't afford to go to the hotels in Cannon Beach or Seaside, because when they bring 8 people, they have to get 2 or 3 rooms, or they can have one house. I don't want us to be exclusionary. I don't see the benefit of it. So let's not propose the opposite. Let's try to do the right thing here. Let's not reduce the community funds and investments that come from STR properties. And let's also not cause a coalition of ST owners to take legal action. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rob. And if you could stop sharing your screen, please. And we are going to move on to Bob Wilson. Okay, Mr. Wilson, are you able to take yourself off mute? There you go.
All right, thanks. My question was, although that was a very interesting presentation, was I'm a property owner. I'm going to build a house there. I'm going to retire there. So are there any consideration in the type of ownership when you consider the limitations on short-term rentals? My situation, I'm looking at possibly doing some limited short-term rentals before I can fully retire to Cove Beach. And my other concern is after I'm there, obviously I won't be doing short-term rentals when I'm retired there, but it's the legacy issue of my kids. I have 3 daughters. I think a lot of you know, because I've had a couple of presentations before. What they do after I pass away and how they could keep it as a family home to visit and congregate there, and what they're doing at that point in time. One of the issues that Rob brought up, which was, I always found it difficult to understand that anyone could own a property in Cove Beach and economically justify the value of that property, how they could ever generate enough income to make it a good investment. I've looked at it and I know what the prices of building there are because I'm in the middle of it. So I'm not sure that there is going to be a proliferation of people coming in the future buying a property in Cove Beach or in Arch Cape. I don't know Arch Cape that well. That could justify buying that property as an investment. So my basic point was, are there any considerations in the type of ownership? I know in the discussion about the ordinance passing that people would complain that a lot of the people are owning their properties and only owning them as a business and renting them out as such, and they don't have any neighborhood attachments. I was wondering if they look at a subset of that, which would be my circumstance, where in the beginning, I'm moving there. I'm going to become a voting resident there as soon as I get an address when I finish my plans. And if that would be a consideration of a type of property owner that would be able to do short-term rentals on a limited basis, whether it would be 50% or 70% or some sort of percentage that it would make sense to supplement the income for me to keep the house as a family unit before I move in, and then what my daughters could do after I pass away. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Next, we have Jonathan Felix Lund.
Hi, Gail. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yep. Hear me? Okay.
Yep.
I have all 3 kiddos, so I'm at the park. I appreciate all of the data you put together. I think it really helps us see the issue. And a couple questions I had are just whether or not we can also overlay the heat map that you have for where the short-term rentals are with where the population centers are as well. Because if we're talking about, one of the main issues brought up was, does this make it harder for low-income housing to be accessible. And if we talk about like someone said earlier, all the homes just west of 101, if those become regulated with caps, like does that actually push like the artificial demand east? And is this something that will be an unintended consequence of capping the area where people have the highest demand for having a short-term stay? And whether you've looked into that or whether you can pull that data for the board once you go up to that. And I'm also wondering if whether you can also kind of have side-by-side to complaints, have verified complaints, because I feel like the complaints can be a bit of a, it's helpful as a helpful data point, but if you were able to compare them to verified complaints next to that as well, I think it would give an interesting perspective, because complaints are free, cheap, and easy, and they go in waves. And another thing that I think would be really helpful is what's the velocity of growth in these areas, because we've never really seen that from a data perspective, but there's been a lot of talk about, every new house is becoming a short-term rental. And I think it'd be really great for us all to see the growth over the last, number of years since the ordinance was enacted. So we can see, what is that actually, and what's the kind of where are we going with it? Because right now we're just talking about it with it seems like a number of assumptions. Yeah, those are kind of the questions of whether those data pieces could be added for all of us to see a little bit more transparently what's going on.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. All right, next is Guido Pepperoni.
Hi, Gail. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, Gail. First of all, thanks for hosting the meeting and the public input today. I had a question and then a follow-up question. Would it be possible to understand the ratio of undeveloped properties, so platted lots, to the ones that have been developed so far?
I don't have that data right now. We would have to work with GIS to pull that data.
Thank you. That's exactly what I'm asking. So I went in and I looked at your survey, and it looks like there's representation for people that have built homes there, whether they live there, as they say, full time, or whether they rent them out. But I didn't see any representation of people that have lots in the area, and actually people that intended to build, and because of water moratorium and the state of the economy, have not been able to build. So how do we properly capture that the rights of those people also get represented when we're discussing caps?
Well, I don't think it would be possible to capture someone's intent. We would have to basically contact every single property owner and ask them, are you intending to build? Did you intend to build? Why didn't you build? And we just don't have the capacity to do that kind of a survey.
Well, that's why I'm asking the question. I think you're probably missing a significant portion of people, me included, that would like to build in the near future, and they're not represented in this survey. If we're discussing caps, I would hope that we respect everybody's property rights, not just the ones that have built their homes already. Just something to think about in terms of what the survey really represents, and does it actually take into account everybody that owns property? Thank you, Gail.
Okay, thank you, Guido. Next, we have Stephanie Reese.
Hi, everybody. So I want to speak from a little bit of personal experience. My family has owned property here in Arch Cape for over 40 years. I believe my grandparents bought our current property in 1973, and it was always a rental. First, it was the Skyview Lodge with it was a little motel on Highway 101, and then they bought the house that I'm currently sitting in. That's been a rental ever since I was a kid. And I think Rob brought up a lot of really good points that because of having rentals around us, it creates more diversity in the neighborhood. So when I was a kid, other kids would actually be here for me to play with. I would meet people from Germany. It would bring in a lot more people that aren't able to experience this beautiful coastline that we have. And also what I witnessed is business growth. There's so many more restaurants and businesses now, and the whole community, all the way from Astoria, all the way down to Nehalem, has grown incredibly because of the influx of people that are able to come here. And I can say, my husband and I have been here. We moved in. We're living in the house full time now. It used to be a family vacation home, but now we're splitting our time living here, and then also we travel a lot for work. So we would love to be able to rent the house while we're gone. You know, we don't plan on having it be a rental full time, but we do plan on, you know, we work in the film industry and we'll be gone for a couple months at a time, sometimes working on a feature in another state. So I would love to be able to rent the house while we're gone. I think it also helps reduce crime in the neighborhood, so this doesn't turn into a ghost town. And again, like I said, it makes it more accessible, like Rob brought up, to people that can't typically afford the neighborhood. And then also, I mean, what might end up happening is if people can't rent their properties, we could potentially lose this house. We might not be able to afford it anymore because we can't rent it anymore. And I don't know about other homeowners, but we let our short-term rental permit lapse in 2019 because of repairs we had to do to the house. And then COVID happened and there was the moratorium, and there was no warning that if you didn't renew your permit prior to that, you're not going to get it back. And I've reached out to the county to try and get it back, and they, you know, just said the moratorium just keeps getting pushed. So that's another huge concern about grandfathering in, is not even just people that still managed to keep their permits, but people that lost their permit due to the pandemic and now can't get that permit back. So I just wanted to raise some of those concerns and, you know, give a perspective from someone whose family has been here since the early 70s.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next, we have Paul Putke.
Hello, Gail. I've got a series of questions. Can I ask them one at a time, please?
Sure.
Okay, the first question is, at the commissioner's work session this last week, community development proposed a 4% cap in each residential area. On the online survey, I noticed they had a 10% cap. Is the county changed? Is community development changing the recommendation from 4 to 10?
I did not see a 10% cap. I'm curious about that. No, with the 4% was an initial starting point, and it's not a final proposal. It was a number that we drew from a University of Oregon study that was conducted in 2017, and it was specifically looking at regulation of short-term rentals, and it was primarily geared towards cities under 100,000 people within the state. Or 10,000, I forget which, I think it was 100,000. And so that was the initial starting point that we put forward. It's not anything that's final, but we needed to pull some sort of foundation to even start making a recommendation. And that study recommended a 4% cap on total housing stock within a city. So we had to kind of extrapolate and bring it down to the zone level to make it apply to a county. So.
Okay. Using the 4% number, did you all actually calculate a total number of available short-term rentals that would be west of Highway 101?
We didn't do the 4% calculation. We know that almost all the zones are above 4% right now, except for I think the RA1, and there might be one other. But clearly the areas where we see the highest concentrations, Arch Cape, Cove Beach, and the Clatsop Plains area, they're well over 4%.
Okay. And then my last question. Assuming, let's just say 5%, because it's different than 4 and 10. If in the residential area is already above the cap that may be imposed, what would happen? Would that be in that zoning area? Would that zone be frozen until the number of short-term rentals fell below the cap, and then the application be reapplied? And on top of that question, will grandfathered STRs be included in the cap?
And so these are questions that we need input on. We don't have a final recommendation. We don't even have an initial recommendation. So I think there's several ways that you could calculate it. One is if you say, we'll use the 4%. So that 4% could include all the grandfathered units. It could be in addition to grandfather units, which would actually give you an increase in short-term rentals. If it includes grandfather units, then everybody's locked until that number falls to 4% or below. And that would have to occur by sale of short-term rental units because licenses are no longer transferable. Does that make sense, Paul?
Yeah, it makes sense. I was just wondering. I was just trying to get the county's thinking on where they were going for this. I know you wanted input, but I just wanted to know what you were thinking. That's all.
And so to go back to the survey, so the survey question says, should short-term rentals be capped based on the ratio of short-term rentals to the total number of dwellings in a zoning district? And then it gives an example, and then it says no more than 10%. So that was just a number we put out. It's not a recommended number. It's not a final recommendation. It was just an example using a number. So
no, I get that. I was just wondering why there was just a change from the presentation you gave to the board to what the survey came out
10
with.
is such a nice round number.
True, it does make math easier. I agree with that.
That's really,
Okay,
that's
thank
really
you.
Yep. Thanks, Paul. Next, we have Kathleen Kearney.
I've been writing all sorts of good notes, so I hope I can compose this correctly. Our family, we've 4th-generation Arch Capers. Great grandma, I hope, feed the people that build the tunnel. And she lived down there. It was passed down through the family, and now we've been visiting summers here and there and weekends, and we're not full time. And we just spent a whole bunch of money to renovate it to be a short-term rental, and we're left kind of standing. So I think everybody can be in a different rental possibility, short-term rental position, depending on where they're at. They need to keep their house in the family. My question is, at this point, I don't think I'm in favor of a cap, or at least raise a cap that we can continue and or get in line to be a rental. My biggest thing is it's a quality of life issue. You know, what does that mean for define quality of life is kind of my perception of how do we be a good neighbor if we do have rentals. And I know the commissioners have worked a while on kind of tamping down and defining some of those things and complaints. Some of them are in certain areas. And I know there was a pie diagram of percentage of complaints per area. Is that, I mean, is one unit getting constant complaints that they're constantly leaving garbage out? Or has anybody suggested, can the garbage complainers get extra garbage cans? Or is there, you know, if there weren't complaints, would this be an issue? And I guess that's kind of what Rob in his presentation presented. Each house is configured. You've got more compact lots, you've got bigger lots. Our lot is like a lot and a half. So for us to become a rental, we wouldn't really impact our neighbors per se a whole lot. You know, there are taxes for the transient taxes are already in place for the traffic, and that kind of impact that it might have. I know not all STRs are read into 100% of the time, but obviously, how do you define all that? How do you figure? And the other question I had, which may be later, but the grandfathering, if we do it every year, renew our permits, does that pass on to family members, or is that just a new owner? So if my parents had a unit that they rented and they passed on and we traded ownership, would we become a new owner and kicked out of the whatever cap is and have to get back in line again? So a lot of little things I've been thinking and considering. I have not a problem being a good neighbor, just finding out what that means, whether that means go to the review board and say, here's our specific situation. Can we have a permit to do this as a possible option? So, all right, I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen. And just to address one of your questions regarding transferability of permits, permits are no longer transferable. So yes, if the property changes hands,
permits are no longer transferable. Property changes hands. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so permits are not transferable. Go ahead, Denise.
My apologies. Thank you, Director Hendrickson, for this opportunity to provide input on capping and other STR restrictions that we hope will inform the board's decisions on limiting the number of STRs in our unincorporated county neighborhoods. My husband Jeff and I commend you for the planning that you and your team have undertaken in the methodology. And we also especially commend Commissioner Webb for expressing her understanding the neighborhoods mean more than just livability. For the sake of argument, because we still believe that the county unlawfully permitted STRs in residential zones where county code excluded them as a permitted use, we would like to comment on 3 points that were brought up in the board's August 3rd work session and that you've asked for input on today. First, cap. If there must be STRs in the county's residential zones, then yes, of course, we support imposing a cap, as low a percentage cap as possible, such as the reasonable 4% that you and your team recommended in the methodology. Given the choice between capping by the county's total existing housing stock and capping by zone, we believe the selection must be capping by zone on current and future homes, considering the concentration of STRs in certain communities, as you've exhibited here today and in your methodology. Second, grandfathering in existing STR permits. Although we understand that some sort of transition period might be necessary, we oppose grandfathering in as a prolonged measure. And to address a notion suggested at the August 3rd work session and that you just mentioned, Director Hendrickson, we oppose having a percentage cap be allowed on top of the existing number of potentially grandfathered in STRs. Given that the percentage of homes in my neighborhood operating as STR businesses is already at a ridiculous 30%, adding a further 4% is not limiting, but as you just mentioned, Dr. Hendrickson, expanding. We can support a cap of 4% by zone on current and future homes in the zone, but that's it. Third, distancing or separation requirements of STRs. Reducing the density of STRs in a given neighborhood or on a given road appeals to us, and we recommend that this concept be further clarified for our commissioners, since most of them in the August 3rd work session didn't seem to understand the challenge that a dense cluster of STRs presents to livability. For example, since my home is situated in the middle of 2 lanes, we have the potential of being surrounded on 6 sides by STRs within 25 feet of our property. And most of these homes proximate to our property are large homes that would be permitted to accommodate some 14 people or so. That could be scores of people adjacent to our property at one time. So yes, imposing a minimum distance between STRs of 200 to 300 feet would make a huge difference in quality of life for us and for other residents living in neighborhoods with high concentrations of STRs. We'd like to add a footnote as well. In the last few weeks, we have spoken with hundreds of Clatsop County constituents, not only folks from so-called wealthy enclaves, but from all reaches of the county, including folks who live east of Highway 101, who feel betrayed by the county, by the board's passing Ordinance 2205 in June, which opened the floodgates to, without any further restrictions, unlimited STR growth in all 16 residential zones of unincorporated Clatsop County. We just want to take this opportunity to report to you that these hundreds of Clatsop County voters state that they want to see significant reductions in the current numbers of STRs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Denise. Next is RSCC voter resident.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, my name is Rick Smith, and I'm both a voter and resident of Clatsop County, and I live in Falcon Cove. Thank you, Director Hendrickson, for your support and efforts to help the county establish cap limits on STRs in residential zones. I have a few comments about this process. First, I'm disappointed in the county's planning for these public hearings. Folks were only given 3 days notice. This is an extremely short notice for a public hearing that has such a huge impact. I understand the county only needs to give 24 hours, but I question the county's intentions of not giving more time to let folks know about the meeting so they could attend this public hearing. Second, I disagree with your positioning of offering only 4 options this early in the process. If someone had to choose only one of those options, please be flexible based on our feedback to consider other options. There should be caps, and it should be a percentage of total homes in each residential zone. Having a percentage would be fair to those landowners that have not yet built their homes. So don't just pick a number and place it. I do feel it's appropriate to consider folks that have not yet built their homes. I hope that you have not finished your research on the methodology with regard to calculating the caps. And of course, you should include the grandfather units in your total calculations, and there should be a freeze until that number comes below the final cap that you decide. I do have one question. Is the University of Oregon the only study that you're going to use to base your statistics on? All of Clatsop County population is, at about 40,000 people, much less than 100,000 that the study addresses. And there are STR caps throughout the United States for small residential communities that have already adopted the need for caps, yet you've only selected a single study focused on the state of Oregon. There are many more small residential areas that have STR caps that should be considered in your methodology. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your input. We do have another public meeting scheduled on August 17th at 6 p.m. This will also be a virtual meeting. And with regard to just using only the study, we also looked at several other jurisdictions, both within Clatsop County, within the state, and also outside. We looked at Port Washington, or Port Townsend, Washington. We looked at Durango, Colorado, South Lake Tahoe, California, and they also, some of those jurisdictions do have caps. I think it's either Durango or South Lake Tahoe has a 3% cap, and the city of North Bend, Oregon has a 3% cap for a total number of 64 short-term rentals within their city. So we did look at other jurisdictions as well, and not just only the study. Next, we have Scott Harn.
Hi, thank you, Gail, and my apologies. I just joined the meeting late, and I hope that I may have missed something relevant, but my comments are just derived from having read the package that you guys produced and published over the last couple of weeks. And, my comment is about the concept of a cap. And I think, just coming up with a cap based on the percentage of total homes has a risk of being very, very arbitrary. And in certain zones specifically, let's take the CR zone, for example. If you look at I think we should consider, or county, as you continue to develop this and work on these recommendations going forward, you should contemplate introducing a hurdle or a threshold of some kind, maybe at the zone level, that's tied to the percentage of actually year-round occupied homes. And if that number is, say, less than a hurdle of, let's say, 50%, then maybe that zone doesn't even qualify for a cap, because, or at some point, maybe the cap shouldn't need to be any lower than the percentage of year-round occupied homes. Because if you were to implement the cap, then what you're doing is you're just creating a zone that has a bunch of vacant homes. And who really wins in that scenario? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Next is Dennis Mcvicker.
Thank you. And I also specifically want to thank the commissioners for taking the public input and for their consideration of this. I have 3 points that I'd like to make, all of which support the question, why are we even here talking about this? Why are we talking about caps or anything at this point in time? The first point is that staff worked with the community for over a year, getting lots of input, looking at lots of different issues, and that work was concluded. And the outcome of that work resulted in some added regulations. And here we are 2 months later, considering it all over again. So I just don't understand why we're considering this now, especially without seeing the impact that the new regulations have been implemented have on the problem, whatever the problem is. So first point, why are we doing this now when we just went through a very extensive process with lots of public involvement and came to conclusions on that process? The second point is that I think we have to be really, really careful with this University of Oregon report, because it is focused on cities, not counties, number one. And especially, as was just referenced, the kind of the population that we have on the North Coast, and especially in some of the higher density STR areas, beachfront, these are typically not normal neighborhoods where people live there all the time. And so to take this report, and Gail, using your comment, extrapolating the data over to our communities, I just don't think you can do that kind of extrapolation. Our communities are very, very different. I'll use an extreme. I live on Carnahan Road. That is Cannon View Park is kind of neighborhood. There are 50 houses on Carnahan Road. One of those houses has a permanent resident. So we have a 2% of the houses on Carnahan Road have permanent residents. I think 6 or 7 houses have STRs. That's 12%. But we get very, very few complaints. And so just as was already referenced, applying these rules that are recommendations by the U of O report that are for a city of 100,000 people, applying that to Carnahan Road that has 1 permanent resident, you just can't extrapolate to that. And again, I know that Carnahan Road is probably an extreme example, but I think if we look at the rest, well, I guess I saw data. I saw data. Well, there's data that shows maybe not as extreme, but certainly other neighborhoods that we're talking about that the full-time residency is 30% or less. And so I think we really have to take that into consideration if we're going to take a report like this and just start implementing some of the recommendations on that report. I guess I would also say, if we really look at that report, everything that report recommends should be implemented has already been implemented. And even though they would suggest that if your total percentage is that you don't really implement much until your total percentage is over 4%, which ours is not. So we've already implemented much of what has been implemented on that report. Certainly, we've implemented, I believe, everything that report would suggest implementing in our situation. So I would just encourage the board to take a closer look at that report and really see what the authors of that report would recommend for our county, because I don't think that is consistent with what staff has recommended for our county. My final point is with respect to complaints, and I would assume this is why we're here. I would assume complaints is kind of the measure that says, should we be here talking? Referencing that report again, they indicate that if you have more than 25 complaints per year in a community, then that's when you start, really looking more heavily at adding restrictions. Well, we've had in the county, if I understand the numbers right, we've had 88 complaints in 4 years. Countywide, that's 22 complaints per year. But what I would like the board to do is to look and see what those complaints really are. If I look at the 10 complaints in all of Arch Cape, so Arch Cape has 68 STRs, 10 complaints over 4 years. 3 of those complaints were against me because I was parking on my own property. And if you look at those complaints, they were all identified by staff as non-violations. Okay. 3 of the complaints were against no STR permit. And actually, if I remember right, about 20 of the 88 were complaints that there was no STR permit. And so 20 of the 88 are not even complaints against the current licensed STRs. They're complaints against people who don't have licenses. Okay. There's complaints about a hip camp. How is that a complaint about an STR? So I really think if you look at the 10 complaints at Arch Cape, I don't believe any of them are valid. I guess there's 3 complaints about COVID violations. And so maybe you can say that those 3 are valid complaints against current STRs. So 3 complaints over 4 years for 68 STRs in Arch Cape. That tells me, why are we even here talking about this? And there's just one other piece of data that I want to give, and that is, if you look at county's report on the complaints with respect to Falcon, actually back up, there's 2 things I want you to look at. One is 22 of the 88 complaints were made against 2 STRs. 2 STRs. And so deal with those 2 STRs. Don't hold everyone else accountable for what 2 STRs are doing. Deal with those. So you eliminate that 2 STRs, and now you got 66 complaints against everyone else. Well, it's interesting to me, if you look deeper into the numbers, you find even more data that the county has that like 52% of the 22 against those 2 STRs weren't even code violations. Okay, so we talk about these 88 complaints, but I think if the county looked closer at those complaints, half of them are not code violations. Half of them shouldn't even be on the list. And so my question is, from a perspective of complaints, what are we really trying to solve? And I would encourage, before any further decisions are made, that the board take a deeper dive into the actual complaints and look at the complaints that are actually against STRs, look at the complaints that are actually code violations, and then look at what type of complaints those are and determine what codes need to go in place to resolve the real issues. But even more important for today's conversation is look at the number of complaints and just ask the question, does that mean with those complaints that short-term rentals are really causing, in general, a problem for the county and for the residents of the county? And I understand that you can have 1 or 2 bad outliers, like these 2 STRs that have 22 complaints. I get that. And I get it that there's maybe a half a dozen neighbors that are affected by that. I get that. But deal with that problem. Don't cause the entire county to kind of be punished because you've got 1 or 2 bad actors. So to summarize that, I would really encourage the county staff to take a deep dive into these complaints and really sort out for the board how many complaints are actual violations against current licensed STRs, and what are those complaints, so that we make sure we're responding appropriately. Thank you so much for your time, especially for the commissioners on the line. I really appreciate your involvement in listening to this.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll hear from John Meyer.
Thank you, Gail, and good morning, everyone. I've got us, having listened to these tremendous presentations, I'm just overwhelmed by how astute they are, how well understood they are, and I just can't do any better than the speakers in front of me in terms of making these issues influencing people or what. But I will simply say that I do agree completely on this issue of complaints. And we've been hearing this for month after month after month. And we hear month after month after month that many of the complaints are unfounded. And the analysis that you just heard is extraordinary. And the answer to that is not just we're taking care of that in the new regs, which we have, but the answer has got to be to stop misrepresenting that the complaints from Cove Beach are a significant number when so many of those complaints were fabricated. It doesn't help the dialogue going forward to continue to put up a chart that shows a complaint number that has been debunked so many times by so many people in such an excellent way. And if we're staring at a referendum where all of this is going to get in front of the public, that chart with complaints needs to be corrected. It does a disservice. It's been corrected in the regulations. We appreciate that. That's wonderful. But what's not good is that this saga continues and the same high complaint number appears every single presentation that I've attended. And it goes through this same explanation of it creates a misleading impression, let's fix it. So I really support the concern expressed there. I also am concerned about the prominence of a University of Oregon study that's 7 years old and was clearly intended for something other than what we're dealing with here. We spent several years debunking the Johnson economics study that said short-term rentals in unincorporated Clatsop County were hurting affordable housing. It was one of the main narrative themes put forward by the Planning Commission, that study. And finally, the county took the time, took the energy, and evaluated it and concluded that was not the case. That study was incorrect. I think if you did the same kind of analysis to the University of Oregon study, you'd get the same conclusion. It just doesn't apply to Clatsop County. If you take 4% as an example, we have approximately 50 or so homes in Cove Beach. 4% of 50 is 2. All right, 2 STRs in all of Cove Beach. We currently have 16. So what are we doing here? We're coming up with a cap system and an annual permit renewal system and transferability restrictions that will whittle down the 16 until we get down to 2. And then what we've got is different numbers in different other zones and communities that allow those STRs to continue. It's just the study, the 4% number is just inappropriately applied. We have to look at the individual communities that we have. I also think that some concern has to be given to landowners. It's not sufficient, I believe, to say we don't know what their intent was, so therefore we can't include them as having a property right here. When those people bought their land, whether they intended to or not, it was a property right that they had associated with their land. And I don't think it's proper to take that property right away from them any more than it is to take away from somebody that spent hundreds of thousands of dollars renovating their house with the intention of renting it, or someone that spent hundreds of thousands of dollars or $1 million building a house with the intention of renting it. I don't think we can trample on property rights, and a landowner property rights are no different, except in scale, than those of a homeowner. And finally, I really wish that the county would address this constant repetitive theme that all of us short-term rental people, except a special class in Arch Cape, have been acting unlawfully for as long as we've owned a short-term rental in this community. We have not been acting unlawfully. I don't act unlawfully, and I don't think any of the short-term rental owners that I know in Cove Beach act unlawfully. And I would appreciate the county attorney coming out and clarifying, so we don't have to keep addressing this. And that theme of unlawfulness is the theme, the prominent, dominant theme that will be in the referendum undoing the county regulations. So until such time as the county addresses that accusation, are they unlawful? Have we been acting unlawfully? Was my permit unlawful? Can the county address that? I think we've got to stop kind of, diverting and distracting on issues that keep getting brought up time and time again that are important to people. Those people that believe we acted or are acting unlawfully certainly have grounds for that. But what I'm not seeing is any explanation from the county as to whether they agreed with that. It's silent, as far as I can tell. And silence is a problem when people are accusing 150 some odd property owners of acting unlawfully. So I would sincerely hope that that issue could be included and should be included in the reviews going forward here. Let's get it on the table. Let's have a discussion about that issue. It's time to have it. It should have been had months and months ago. But now it's coming out, and it's going to be a major theme in going forward. We're going to hear it time and time again until such time as the county addresses it. Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's comments, and I hope we can get our way through this and get it worked out. And I just don't think we need caps. We don't need new regulations. We've got excellent regulations on the books. Let's move on with our lives. Let's give this a chance to settle in and stop fighting about this. Stop consuming a tremendous amount of time on everyone's part, and then take a look at it later and see how it worked out, what we didn't do. That would be my recommendation. Thank you, Gail.
Okay, thank you, John. Next, we have Susanna Gladwin.
Hi, I have more questions. One is, now we're going into the dry season and wells are getting lower in springs, about water use balance among a sudden increase of population in STRs versus kind of the background use, and that the increase of population generally correlates with drier weather. So there's the water issue. I wanted to ask if that's being put into the whole formula discussion. And then also about access for fire trucks in case of fire with increased cars and things. Thank you. Those are two things I was wondering about.
Okay, thanks, Susanna. With regard to water, we don't require a water, I don't even know what you would call it, a water summary, water data usage. First of all, Clatsop County doesn't have jurisdiction over water supply. So it's either handled through a water district or through the Water Resources Department, because they are the ones who license the wells, and when you get your permit, you're licensed for so much per day, as I understand it. We have a basic requirement when a house is built that you have to be able to supply a minimum amount of water to your house, and you have to be able to document that. But beyond that, we don't monitor water usage. And then with regard to fire department access, every time a road is or a home is built, the fire department has to sign off on it. You know, if people are parked in the road, that could happen at any time, whether it's a short-term rental or a house or somebody having visitors. So the county doesn't monitor the roads every day to see if people are parking there. I'm not quite sure what you would want the county to monitor there, Susanna, but we don't do that above and beyond what we require when a house is initially built. So, okay, I don't see any other hands raised at this point. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to say at this time? Rob?
Just one last sort of closing thought from me, I guess, is that it seems like the county is interested in, you know, trying to listen to the feedback and do a good job, and I appreciate that. I know it's really hard to do when you have such diametrically opposed people on both sides. I also see that the county is trying to figure out if that means being somewhat selective in their application of restrictions, in terms of you're willing to consider the possibility of, you know, west of 101 or this area or that area. And so if you're going to do that, if you're going to figure out that you do need more restrictions, which I hope you don't, I hope you wait to see if these ordinances recently passed will actually, you know, make things better. But if you do, I'd like to understand well before anything goes into place what the goals are for that particular area to be picked, and what the supporting information is on why, as evidenced by other communities or counties that have done similar and been successful. Because choosing to do something that's dissimilar to other coastal communities, I think is ill-sighted. And I know you're all very smart people, so I don't think that's going to happen. I just want to express my concern that, you know, there are many coastal communities that when they do have to have restrictions, they're very careful where they put those restrictions. And I hope that we do the same if more needed.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Next is Vivian.
Thank you. Lots of interesting information as usual. And first of all, I want to thank you, Gail, and your staff for coming up with this research-based proposal. I appreciate you taking a look at what's been done already, including at U of O. OSU has also done work, and since I work at OSU, want to give it credit too. And I can pass on some information about the short-term rental information that they've come up with from a forestry aspect. So I'll be glad to do that. But I want to get back to your questions that you had. First of all, while east and west of 101 is an arbitrary concept, it really does address the areas that are most impacted first. And I think that's a good idea. So that's number one. Number two is that looking at this by residential zone rather than a blanket 4% or 5% or 10%, It seems to be a better idea. However, I do think it ought to be based on current housing stock, not on future build out. Third, I have a great long-term neighbor who is also a short-term rental owner. I would hate for her to lose her permit. So grandfathering, as far as I'm concerned, is a good idea. However, grandfathering to me means including existing short-term rentals in the total limit calculation. And finally, yes, there's a lot I hear about complaints, and I'm really tired of hearing that they've been fabricated. I've filled out the complaint form, and I can assure you that by the time I find all the information that's needed, it's an hour-and-a-half process. So it's not something I would ever do blithely. So anyway, that's an aside. But to me, the most important thing that we don't talk about is that we really need to have enough people in our community who are directly involved with the community. We need a critical mass of people, short-term, part-time, full-time, short-term rental owners, to be on the school boards, on the roads committees, on emergency management, water committees, friends of groups. We need people who are actively involved in the community, because that's what a community is. And so when we come up with a number of limits, that's a really important component, I think, that needs to be addressed. And once again, I appreciate your time and everyone else's on this beautiful Saturday, almost afternoon. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vivian. Is there anyone else that would like to speak right now? Okay, seeing none, I just want to wrap up here. And so, as I stated, we do have another public meeting that's at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, August 17th. The link to that meeting was in the email that was sent out by the Public Affairs Office. It's also on the county's calendar on our website, so you can link to that as well. And as part of this, we do have that online survey. I put the link in the chat box, and that's open through September 5th. And then we will be taking the public input that we gather from all the written comments, the surveys, the 2 public meetings that we're holding, and we will put that before the board on September 21st so that they can review that and then give staff additional direction as to which way they would like us to proceed. And then depending upon what that board input looks like on the 21st, we have tentatively scheduled public hearings for a possible adoption of ordinance work that would occur tentatively on October 12th and 26th. And then if that work is completed by that time, then at that point we would move forward with rescinding the moratorium as well. And so that is all the information that I have. I do want to thank everyone again for being out here. It's a really beautiful day, so I hope you all go out and enjoy it. Thank you all for being here. And before I leave, I just want to say Commissioner Thompson and I believe Commissioner Webb was on the line. If either of you had anything you wanted to add before we go.
No, I just appreciate everyone's contribution to the conversation today. Thank you so much.
Okay, and Commissioner Webb, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, I just want to say thank you to everyone who sacrificed their beautiful Saturday morning for this. We are listening very carefully, and we really appreciate your input. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, commissioners. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy and go have a wonderful day. Thank you.